You usually don't expect anything unusual when you think about the Vatican treasury. It's a place that feels cold and sterile, buried deep beneath Vatican City. People often picture it filled only with the expected: chalices, papal mitres, ancient reliquaries. But in reality, it holds countless artifacts that don't see the light of day anymore. Surprisingly, most popes rarely venture inside once they're elected. In fact, some of them don't even seem to show any interest. But one day, Pope Leo XIV decided to break that trend. It was a quiet Tuesday morning after a typical curial meeting when he made a sudden choice. Dismissing his aides, he turned to Monsignor Bellini, the elderly custodian of the treasury, and requested a personal tour to the lowest chamber. "I'd like to see what's locked away," he stated plainly. Bellini was taken aback. It had been decades since a reigning pope had asked to visit those depths. Traditionally, it had been deemed safer to keep those treasures sealed away, as if they were too unsettling to contemplate. Still, Bellini complied. They descended 3 levels by elevator and then made their way down 2 more by foot. The final stretch was carved from stone and silent, accompanied only by the steady hum of climate control machinery. As they walked, the walls were covered in inscriptions that had faded over time, looking like mere shadows. However, above the last vault, one line remained clear, boldly carved into the arch: "Not everything preserved still serves." Leo paused, running a gloved finger over the rough letters. He turned to Bellini and said, "Open it." The final vault responded with a slow hiss as its ancient locks released, letting cool air escape into the room. It felt like the temperature dipped instantly and the air grew heavier. Bellini flicked on the low light system, which cast a gentle glow around the small space simply lined with labeled drawers, gold crosses, rings, and ancient parchments tagged and numbered by generations of archivists. But it was the display case at the far end that caught Leo's attention. It stood chest-high, sealed tight with 4 iron clasps and an old, rusted lock. Bellini pointed it out, saying, "That one hasn't been opened since 1963. Curiosity piqued, Leo approached slowly. "What is it?" There was a moment of hesitation from Bellini before he finally replied, "It was last recorded in 1938. The log describes it simply as the other ring." Leo raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "The other ring?" "Yes, Holy Father, a second fisherman's ring." That revelation made Leo halt in his tracks. He thought it through, realizing the weight of the statement. Typically, only one fisherman's ring exists at any given time, the official signet of the Pope. After a pope's death, it's destroyed and remade for his successor, engraved with his name and the image of St. Peter casting his net. There should never be 2 of them. "So, where did this come from?" Leo pressed, intrigued but puzzled. Bellini continued, "It was found in a sealed box during a reorganization of the vault before the war. It was a rather unsettling day when I discovered a second papal ring. The jeweler had no proof of its history, yet the inscription was unmistakable. It had my name on it, Leo XIV. Not Leo the 13th, not Leo XIV, but Leo XIV. Bellini, my trusted advisor, moved closer to the case, holding this mysterious ring. He took out a set of old iron keys from his robe and, in a calm yet uneasy manner, began to unlock the clasps. One by one, I heard the satisfying clicks. After the 4th, he lifted the lid to reveal a piece of worn velvet cradling a heavy gold ring. It was smooth, exquisitely crafted, with an image of Peter fishing on the Sea of Galilee. etched with such care it looked almost alive. Inside the band, it read my title, Leo XIV, Vicar of Christ. I reached out instinctively and picked it up. Strangely, it wasn't cold. It was warm, almost like it had just been worn. As I slipped it onto my finger, it felt so familiar. No tightness or looseness. It was as if it belonged there all along. "Have you shown this to anyone?" I asked Bellini, who replied quietly that he hadn't because he wasn't sure if anyone should see it. I examined the ring more closely. It reminded me of the one I wore during my installation mass, and yet this one felt ancient, far older than it ought to be. It was almost like it had been waiting for me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was genuine, not forged. "What do we do with it?" Bellini asked. I paused, taking a deep breath. If it had been created before my selection, perhaps it wasn't crafted by human hands at all. I gently placed the ring back in its case and instructed him to seal it again, urging him to keep it a secret. As I turned to leave, I felt compelled to look back, my voice barely a whisper. If it's here, then something else is coming. Even after the case was closed, I could still sense the ring's presence, the weight of it lingering on my finger. Later that night, in my private study, I was alone with the official fisherman's ring glinting on my hand, the one the world knew. Yet it felt like a mere replica of something much deeper, something more authentic. Sleep eluded me, gnawing at my thoughts. The following morning I called upon Bellini again. "I need the original ledger," I said firmly, "the one that documented the ring's creation." He hesitated, explaining that it was stored in a secondary archive beneath the treasury level. "Then we must go back," I declared. I had a feeling something significant was at stake. I recently stumbled upon something quite extraordinary. You see, there was this ring, but it wasn't made for show. It was crafted for someone specific. In the Vatican's secondary archive, I found a different atmosphere compared to what one might expect. Instead of artifacts, the walls were lined with volumes and ledgers, meticulously handwritten by generations of Vatican archivists, dating back centuries. Most of those pages had probably gone unread for a long time. Among the clutter, Bellini, a friend of mine, pulled out this hefty red book, its cover bound in goat skin. He carefully placed it on a large marble table, and as he turned the pages, I saw the year 1938. It was a bit faded but still intact. What struck me was the entry inscribed there. "One gold signet ring uncommissioned, inscription Leo XIV, Vicar of Christ. No maker's mark, no official papal decree to back it up, and no suggestion it was a forgery." As I scanned the page, something caught my eye. Beneath the main description, written in a different hand and in smaller print, there was a line that read, "To be opened only when he recognizes it." I glanced at Bellini, curiosity swirling in my mind. "Was that there before?" I asked. He shrugged, mentioning that there was no signature to identify the author. Bellini began translating it, scribbling in the margin. "To be opened only when he recognizes it." The moment he finished, something peculiar occurred. A tiny crack emerged between the pages, almost like the paper itself was inviting me to look closer. I had to lean in, and there it was, a narrow slit between the bound pages. With shaky fingers, I pulled out a folded piece of parchment, and it was unmarked. No date, no seal, just a single line written in bold black ink. The one whose name was engraved before his election must prepare not to reign, but to resist. I blinked, processing the weight of those words. Centered underneath was simply the word received, accompanied by a faded red mark, a fingerprint. I looked at Bellini, taken aback. "How long has this been here?" I asked, feeling a chill. Bellini speculated it had been hidden, perhaps inserted after the book was bound, maybe even back in the 1930s. I couldn't help but wonder, who knew I would be elected? Returning to my residence, I held that parchment close, tucked away in my pocket, folded 3 times, keeping it to myself. I didn't mention the second ring to my aides. It had left me in a contemplative silence. Later that evening, while going through my breviary, I discovered something unexpected. A small slip of cream-colored paper, slightly frayed at the edges. Written in English were the words, "If the ring was already made, then so was the cross." Catching my breath, I sat at my desk, removed the fisherman's ring from my finger, and stared at it. After a moment, I reached into my drawer and retrieved a small silver chain, a cherished gift from my mother back when I was in seminary. These moments felt heavy with significance, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were all leading me to something profound. I had an experience that still makes the hairs on my neck stand up. Picture this. I placed a simple wooden cross beside a ring and almost instinctively whispered, "If both were prepared for me, then who prepared me?" The room was silent, but outside in the hallway, a Swiss guard later claimed he heard something. Not quite a voice, more like breath against stone, and the only word that stuck with him was, "soon." Just the following week, Pope Leo XIV made a spontaneous trip to Castel Gandolfo. It wasn't supposed to be anything major, no media, no formal rituals, just a quiet day to unwind, or at least that's what the public was told. The truth, he sought a private chat with someone who had once been deeply intertwined with the papacy, Cardinal Emeritus Giovanni della Torre. At 91 years old, della Torre was nearly blind, frail, and hardly left his room, but in his prime, he had served under 3 popes, overseeing both liturgical ceremonies and the apostolic archive. He'd seen and safeguarded many secrets over the years, and Leo believed he might possess the answers he sought. When the Pope arrived unexpectedly, just accompanied by 2 Swiss guards, he asked the aides to wait outside. There was della Torre, already perched in a high-backed chair, hands clasped in his lap, his zucchetto slightly askew on his thinning white hair. As Leo stepped in, the cardinal turned slightly and smiled. "Holy Father, I wondered when you would come," he said. Leo blinked, caught off guard. "You knew I would," he replied, though it seemed the ring had known before he did. Taking a seat across from him, the soft golden light from the window bathed both their faces. From within his robe, Leo pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing the second ring nestled in linen. Della Torre didn't reach for it. Instead, he nodded, eyes closed, murmuring, "It's heavier, isn't it?" "Not in weight, in time," Leo replied, studying him carefully. Della Torre opened his eyes. "You've seen it before, only once. Paul VI." He paused, as if lost in thought. I found the notation. The case had never been opened, but I remembered the phrase written beneath it. What did it say? His voice dropped to a whisper. "He will not wear it in pride, but in warning." Leo leaned back, absorbing the gravity of that statement. Della Torre continued, "There have been whispers among the archivists, that certain names were penned before they were chosen, not merely by conclave, but by something else. Prophecy. Preparation, Leo interjected. There's a difference, Delator emphasized. A prophecy indicates who, while preparation reveals why. Why me? That's the part they never document. Leo leaned in even closer. There was a note in the ledger. It said, "The one who recognizes the ring must prepare not to reign, but to resist." Delator simply nodded in acknowledgement, leaving the weight of his words lingering in the air. The season arrived sooner than I had anticipated. It was a moment of realization for me, a gentle reminder of a deeper truth. Holiness, I understood, didn't mean that I needed to take charge of the church. Instead, I was called to support it, to be its guardian. The air was still. The olive trees outside swayed softly in a warming breeze, and as I turned my attention back to the box before me, I found myself staring at the ring again. This wasn't something I had sought out, after all. Neither did Peter. There was a pause, a moment of introspection, before Delator's voice broke the silence. He reached into his coat and pulled out a fabric-wrapped bundle. "There's something else I need to show you," he said, his eyes reflecting years of secret keeping. As he unwrapped it, an aged black-and-white photograph emerged, slightly blurred by time. It depicted a table in what looked like a treasury, and resting upon it was the very same ring. I was taken aback by what I saw next. A date, 1939, scribbled neatly in the corner. Delator explained that this photo had come from a Jesuit historian who had briefly worked in the archives before the war. Sadly, he had passed away unexpectedly, leaving this behind as his only legacy. "It was already created," I murmured, grasping the weight of its meaning. "Yes, long before you came into this world," Delator affirmed, carefully rewrapping the photograph and offering it to me. But I hesitated. "I'm not sure I want to keep that," I admitted. Delator, with a gentle tone, posed a question that struck deep. "If God allowed your name to be inscribed in gold before you even existed, what other truths do you think He has already revealed that you have yet to discover?" Lost in thought, I stood up and closed the box. The notion that the ring was a divine message weighed heavily on my mind, like an envelope waiting to be opened. Later that evening, I found myself in solitude within the apostolic chapel, the stillness echoing around me. I opened my breviary, and out slipped a small folded note, penned in handwriting that was not my own. It read, "You will not be remembered for what you built. You will be remembered for what you refused to let fall." I gazed at the crucifix above the altar, feeling a surge of humility and determination. "Then grant me the strength," I whispered, "to hold it together." It was the feast of the chair of St. Peter. The morning in Rome had a quiet beauty, with clear skies and the basilica basking in the early sunlight. There were no momentous political gatherings or significant announcements planned for the day, just the Mass, a homily, a blessing. Having presided over countless Masses in St. Peter's, I felt drawn to do something different that day. I requested to vest alone, a departure from the usual chaos of the papal sacristy where assistants would bustle about, helping me with garments and ensuring the official fisherman's ring adorned my finger. That morning, however, I opted for solitude. Once the door closed behind me, I stepped into the embrace of tranquility. Hidden in the inner pocket of my white cassock, I found the box, velvet-lined and unmarked, I opened it and gazed once more at the ring. It was another one, identical yet distinct. I couldn't help but stare at it for nearly a minute. "If you created this before I even knew, show me its meaning," I mumbled to the empty room. Leaving the official ring on the vesting table, I slipped the second one onto my finger. It fit, as always, perfectly. Mass carried on without a hitch, but afterward, a few witnesses shared an odd observation. A woman sitting 3 pews from the front told her husband she couldn't see the ring when I raised the chalice. He swore he'd seen it, and so did a few others, yet 3 people described that same moment. My hand lifted in a blessing, but it seemed the ring was simply gone. Not missing or invisible, just not there. After the Mass, I returned to the sacristy and silently removed my vestments. Looking down at my hand, the ring still gleamed there, gold, warm, heavy. I touched it, then frowned. Curiously, there was a faint indentation under the skin, almost as if something was pressing beneath the ring, sinking slightly into my flesh. Later that evening, in my private study, I decided to take the ring off and place it on my desk. Staring at it, a thought crossed my mind. I opened its case and pulled out the official fisherman's ring, setting them side by side. At first glance, they looked identical, but then the light caught my eye. The engraving on the second ring had changed. It had always read, "Leo XIV, Vicar of Christ," but now, beneath that line, another inscription had emerged, "Do not remove this from fire." I blinked in disbelief, turning the ring over. No scratch marks, no signs of tampering, yet the letters were sharp and fresh, as if they'd just been struck into the metal. I rummaged through my desk drawer and grabbed a magnifier to examine that second line more closely. It wasn't merely carved. It had been burned in. The gold around the letters was slightly darkened, as if the heat had come from within the metal itself. As I touched the ring again, it felt warm. That's when I noticed a sound, a faint hum emanating from the ring itself. It reminded me of metal cooling, like something fresh out of a forge, despite the fact that it hadn't been touched in days. I leaned back, my mind racing. It was just past midnight when I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find a Swiss guard, looking anxious and pale. He held out a small box with a perplexed expression. "It was strange," he said, arriving from the crypt office without a sender's name on it, but specifically addressed to me. Curiosity piqued, I took the box and opened it, revealing a black and white photo resting inside. In the image lay a papal ring, my ring, positioned atop an open Bible. The visible passage was from Isaiah. "I have refined you not as silver, but in the furnace of affliction." I stared at it, a chill running down my spine, and asked the guard, "Did anyone see who dropped this off?" He shook his head. "No, Holy Father." Then I realized it wasn't left here. It was returned. That ring belonged to Father Matteo Russo, a quiet and dedicated theology professor, only 35 years old and just 5 years ordained. Known for his clarity rather than any mystical visions, he was the last person you'd expect to have a profound experience. Yet, he felt compelled one morning to urgently meet with the apostolic nuncio. He claimed he had seen something vital, something the Holy Father must know about. He spoke of a dream, but believe me, it wasn't like any ordinary dream. He could recall every single detail without confusion or fading. Matteo described a dark, windowless hall where a table stood with a ring glowing subtly against the shadows. As he reached for it, a hand stopped him, firm, yet not aggressive. The man in white, whose face was obscured by shadows, said, "He was chosen because he already burned." Matteo inquired, "Who?" The reply came, "The one whose name was written in gold before it was spoken in smoke." Suddenly the table ignited, though the fire didn't come from above. Instead, it surged upward, as if something buried deep below was desperate to break free. Just before waking, Matteo saw a chilling inscription on the ring. "Do not remove this from fire." Days later, when news of his request reached the Secretariat, it was passed along with caution. After all, many claimed to have divine encounters, but most never got the chance to speak to me. However, once the note reached my hands and I read the profound words Matteo had shared, I sat in stunned silence for a solid 10 minutes. Then I murmured, "Bring him." When Matteo entered my private study, he was visibly nervous. He bowed deeply and said, "I'm not a prophet, Holy Father. I just saw something." I encouraged him gently, "Tell me what you saw." And so he began to share his story. He recounted the dream with such vividness that it sent shivers down my spine. When he finished, there was this heavy silence lingering in the air. Leo quietly pulled open a drawer and after a moment handed me a small velvet box. "Open it," he said, his voice steady but laced with anticipation. Inside, nestled against the soft lining, was a second ring. I picked it up. It felt surprisingly warm, like it had just been taken from a fire. "This is the ring?" I asked in disbelief. I'd only seen it in my dream before now. The engraving caught my eye. There it was, clear as day. "Do not remove this from fire." I froze. It was exactly as I had seen it in my vision. Leo took the ring back, gently closed the box, and leaned forward. His eyes, usually so full of life, held a weight that seemed to age him before my eyes. "Why do you think this came to you?" he asked softly. I took a moment, then replied, "Because someone had to confirm what you don't want to admit. This ring is more than a symbol. It's an instruction." He sat back, processing my words. I could see the turmoil in his mind. "I never wanted any of this," he confessed, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I thought my role was to lead the church through change, but now I feel like I've been chosen to remain steadfast while everything around me shifts." My curiosity piqued. I leaned in. "What if that fire you speak of, Holy Father, is the challenge to stay true to what you believe, even when the world tries to force change on you?" I felt a tension, suggesting that he understood, but he needed time. Leo gazed up at me, his expression shifting, questioning, yet resigned. "Do you mean the urge to change something that should remain untouched? To guard it, even when silence makes you seem frail, especially when the flames rise from within?" He closed his eyes, contemplation washing over him. As I prepared to leave, he handed me a sealed envelope instructing, "This is just for you. If I ever fall silent, it might help the next in line to understand what's coming." I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. As I turned to walk away, he called out again, a hint of concern threading his voice. "From your dream, when the man said I already burned, was that meant as a warning?" I paused, reflecting on the event, and replied, "No, Holy Father, it was a recognition." Later that night, Leo set the second ring on his desk, the candle beside it flickering softly, almost as though it recognized its counterpart. Opening his breviary, he discovered a fresh note inside. It bore the same handwriting as before. The gold does not shine because it is pure. It shines because it survived the furnace. That evening, he prepared for a private mass. There would be no cameras or crowds, just him, 3 priests, 2 servers, and the chapel nestled within the apostolic palace. It was a sacred space where so many had sought guidance before making monumental decisions. He had kept everything to himself: the ring, the note from the priest, and the words that now echoed in his mind. But for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, he decided to leave his official fisherman's ring on his desk and slipped out into the quiet. As I slipped the second ring onto my finger, the Mass started like any other. Reverent, ordered, simple. But there was a noticeable shift the moment I lifted the chalice during the consecration. The ring felt cold in my hand, not just a chill, but a deep, biting cold, as if it had just been pulled from a marble crypt. In that instant, something in the atmosphere seemed to pull back. For a brief second, I hesitated. The priests caught on, while the servers remained oblivious. I pushed through it, raised the chalice, set it down, and tried to move on. Yet the cold lingered. It spread from my palm into my arm and gripped my chest. By the time I knelt, I felt a strange pressure in my lungs. Nothing painful, just a heavy constriction, as if the air had thickened around me. And then, just before I reached the Agnus Dei, the lights flickered once. It was subtle, but the young server near the altar gasped. Then I heard a sound, soft and almost like glass shifting under heat. Out of nowhere, one of the chalice veils slid slightly off the side table. It wasn't touched by anyone, and there was no draft, yet it fell, revealing the papal pectoral cross I had removed earlier. It wasn't resting where I had left it. It lay flat on the table, and beneath it was a small slip of paper. A nearby priest approached, clearly confused, and discreetly picked it up. He glanced at me, seeking permission. I nodded. He read it silently and then handed it to me. In clear handwriting it said, "If you fear the cold, you will forget who walked in fire before you." I folded the note and tucked it away into my sleeve, finishing the Mass without any further disruption. But once I took off the ring afterward, something alarming caught my eye. There was a faint red circle around the base of my finger. It wasn't a rash or bruise, but a mark that felt like pressure emanating from within the metal. I placed the ring on a linen cloth in the sacristy, and to my dismay, it offered no warmth. The very ring that had once burned with a spiritual fire was now dead cold. Later that evening, I met with Cardinal Andrzej Stoyan, a canonist from Poland and one of the few men I fully trusted. I showed him the ring and recounted everything: the treasury, the ledger, that strange phrase that had emerged, the dream, and the unnerving cold at the altar. Stoyan listened attentively, leaning forward as he finally chimed in, "Holiness, we both know what this is. The fire is not in the ring, it's in you." I frowned, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Then why did it go cold?" "Because you doubted," he replied, without missing a beat. Silence enveloped us, not offended, but charged with tension. I leaned back, contemplating his words. "What happens if I doubt again?" He shrugged, a slight smirk on his face. "Maybe nothing, maybe everything." Later that night, Pope Leo sat by himself at his writing desk. He placed a ring next to the lamp's soft glow and opened his journal to a fresh page. With each word he felt a mix of uncertainty and heaviness as he wrote, "I am not Peter. I am not John. I do not consider myself the rock or the beloved. I am merely the one trailing in shadow, still pondering, why me?" As he concluded his thoughts, the candle flickered slightly, not with a dramatic flare, just a subtle shift. To his surprise, the ring, which had felt so cold all day, began to warm ever so slightly. He didn't dare reach for it. Instead, he simply gazed at the ring and murmured, "If you want me to carry this burden, then light it again. If not, let it remain cold." But the ring remained silent, and the candle stayed steady for the rest of the night. The image of Sister Beatrice surfaced in his mind. At 78 years old, she was petite, sharp-minded, and impeccably discreet. For over 40 years, she had quietly served in the Vatican's most secretive archive, the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum. Unlike many archivists who focused on cataloging papal bulls or ancient letters, Beatrice was unique. She worked in a section known only by the initials PF. The meaning behind those letters was a well-kept secret. Some speculated it stood for Predictio Figurum, or prophecies of figures, while others hinted at something even older. Only 3 individuals had the authority to enter that restricted area: the prefect of the archive, the Pope himself, and Sister Beatrice. Remarkably, she had never written to a pope before this moment. One day, a white envelope appeared on Pope Leo's desk, unmarked and simply addressed by hand, delivered directly. Inside was a note that sent a ripple of curiosity through him. It read, "There's an entry bearing your name. It predates your ordination. I believe it may pertain to the ring. Come before the feast alone, no flourish, no title, just be." 3 days later, Pope Leo made his way to the archive dressed simply in white, with no entourage, no cameras, just a quiet resolve. After navigating through 2 checkpoints, he passed a locked door that few cardinals had ever glimpsed. The atmosphere shifted as he walked through marble arches into a shadowy room that smelled of oil and leather, weighted down with the history of centuries. At a back table stood Sister Beatrice, who gently rose and bowed slightly, addressing him with gratitude. "Holy Father, thank you for coming. You mentioned an entry?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "One I have waited decades to share." She opened a thick ledger bound in worn animal hide, its edges dull gold. Its spine bore a deep cross, slightly indented from age. With deliberate care, she turned the pages until she reached a specific point and halted. "Here," she said, guiding Leo's attention. As he leaned in, he noticed the text was in Italian, not Latin, dated 1953, and the handwriting was crisp and steady. I remember that afternoon vividly. It was a Thursday, just an ordinary day on the papal calendar. No special audiences or meetings planned until later. I felt the need to escape to the Vatican Gardens, my quiet refuge, where I could think without anyone watching. I was wearing the second ring, the one I'd discovered recently, my fingers tracing its cold surface as I walked. The first ring, the official fisherman's ring, lay untouched, still sealed in its case on my writing desk, ever since that cold Mass. I hadn't spoken publicly about it, but I couldn't bring myself to part with the second ring either. As I strolled through the nearly empty gardens, I could hear the soft rustle of leaves and the calls of birds, with just 2 Swiss guards trailing a respectful distance behind me. It was peaceful, but I felt a lingering weight on my mind. The discovery of that second ring had changed everything. Earlier that day, Beatrice had relayed something extraordinary to me. I could still hear the words echo in my head, a line from a long-forgotten prophecy. A second ring will appear to the 14th Leo, forged by hands no longer remembered. I read it twice, letting it sink in. That was written 2 decades before I stepped foot in the seminary. When I asked who had written it, she hesitated, her gaze dropping, before revealing the author was unknown. Cardinal Venuti, she finally said, the Vatican diplomat who vanished in 1955. The thought sent chills through me. It was less like a prophecy and more like something intentional, something planted. Beatrice felt it too. I could see the worry in her eyes. After a moment of heavy silence, she pulled out a small linen pouch she had kept hidden under the table. She opened it carefully and revealed a fragment of parchment, blackened at the edges. "Do not remove this from fire," it read in faded brown ink. I felt my heart race. This was inscribed on the second ring, yet the parchment was older, its ink possibly from decades ago, while the document itself was at least 400 years old. I leaned back, my mouth dry with realization. "So this isn't about me. It never was," I stated, a sense of dread creeping in. Beatrice's eyes met mine, and she replied softly, "No, Holy Father, it's about something that's been waiting for you." I quickly tucked the parchment into my coat, a sense of urgency overtaking me. "Keep the ledger sealed and tell no one," I instructed, and with a bow, she responded, "Yes, Your Holiness." As I was about to leave, Beatrice called after me, "May I ask something?" "Of course," I replied. "What happens if the wall breaks?" I turned to look over my shoulder, contemplating the weight of her question. "Then I pray the fire still remembers what it was meant to protect." That night, I returned to my quarters, my mind still racing. I placed the burned parchment beside the second ring and lit a candle, watching as the flame flickered, a dance of light reminiscent of the moments that had preceded this discovery. It leaned toward the ring, just as it had in the beginning, drawing me into the mystery that awaited. Beneath the shade of the cypress trees, past the statue of St. Joseph, I found myself meandering down the stone path towards the replica of the Lord's grotto. I often paused there. Sometimes I prayed, sometimes I simply sat in silence. On that particular morning, I settled onto the cool marble bench, folding my hands in front of me and gazing at the ring resting on my finger. The gold shimmered softly in the gentle sunlight, not polished, just radiating life. As I closed my eyes, I found myself whispering an earnest plea. "If I'm the wall, show me what I'm holding back." When I opened my eyes again, to my astonishment, the ring had vanished. No sound, no weight, just an empty space where it had once rested. I looked down at my bare finger, where a faint red mark lingered, slightly indented, as if the ring had melted through my skin and disappeared. I began to search my lap, the bench, the ground. Nothing. Just then, I became aware of the guards watching me closely. One of them called out, "Holiness, are you well?" I nodded. "Yes, I think so." But I offered no further explanation. In silence, I made my way back to my quarters. Upon arriving, I spotted the velvet box on my desk. Closed. My breath caught in my throat. How could that be? I hadn't brought it back with me. With a slight tremor, I opened the box. There it was. The ring, perfectly nestled inside the soft fabric. but something was different. The inner band, once smooth, now featured a new line carved into it so faint it was almost imperceptible. Tilting it towards the window, the light revealed the words, "If I leave you, it is only to remind you who never will." I didn't cry. I just leaned back, resting the ring gently on the table. "You left. But not because I failed," I murmured to myself. I turned my hand over, examining the indentation on my finger. Though the skin had cooled, the mark remained. As I touched it, a fragment of memory whispered to me, something that had yet to unfold. "You were chosen for what you would refuse, not for what you would change." Later that evening, a note arrived from a bishop in Brazil, a man I had only met once, years ago. The handwritten letter was brief, stating, "In prayer this morning, I saw you in a garden. You looked at your hand and said nothing, but the entire sky bowed to what wasn't there." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside the case with the ring, choosing not to reply. At midnight, I returned to the chapel, the ring kept safely in my pocket. The flickering candlelight cast an ethereal glow against the walls. Kneeling before the altar, I withdrew the ring and placed it gently on the steps below. Then I whispered, "I'm still here." In that moment, nothing stirred, but I noticed the nearest candle flicker sideways, not from a draft, but as if it were drawn by an unseen force. Later that night, one of the guards reported seeing something through the chapel door. He was convinced the Pope was... I was praying alone, just me in the flickering candlelight, when I felt a presence beside me. There was no one else there, but it was almost as if something familiar had returned. In that moment, the ring lay between us, like it was meant to be shared or treasured. By morning, I still had the ring, but I could sense a shift within me. I felt older, yes, but somehow not frail. It was like I had experienced a loss and discovered something profound within that loss. I wore the ring again, but it carried a different weight this time, not as a symbol of power, but more like a reminder of a wound. The story started when the Vatican began repairing the plaster behind one of the beautifully painted walls in the Domus Sancti Mar, the place where cardinals sleep during the conclave. Workmen were tackling some water damage in the corridor that connected rooms 217 and 219. They weren't expecting to uncover anything unusual, but when a tool slipped too far into the wall, it produced a hollow sound. Curious, they pressed deeper, and a small square of plaster popped loose, revealing a hidden compartment that hadn't seen the light for decades. Inside, they discovered a worn leather pouch tied with an aged cord. The workers, following protocol, quickly contacted their supervisor, who then informed the Secretary of State's office. Within 3 hours, the pouch made its way into my hands. As I sat alone in my study, I felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation as I untied the cord. The paper inside was fragile and thin, yet the ink remained clear, beautifully penned in the style of early 20th century Vatican documents. There was no greeting, no date, only a heading that simply stated, "For the eyes of the one who reigns." In the quiet of the room, I blinked in disbelief. The message unfolded before me, detailing a haunting vision from a long-forgotten cardinal. This unnamed figure described a conclave where the smoke never turned to white, where cardinals debated endlessly amidst bells that rang without an audience. Votes were cast, but no one could recall placing them. The vision warned that he who sat in the chair would only feel stone, his voice unheard. he would extend a blessing that would linger just above his palm. And then, in bold clarity, the message concluded, he must carry the ring prepared before his name. As I stared at the letter, the dimensions of the room seemed to shrink around me. I folded the fragile paper and placed it in my lap, feeling compelled to reach for the ring that had sat on my desk, still warm to the touch. Slipping it onto my finger felt as natural as breathing, not too tight, not too loose, just like a piece of me that had always been there, patiently waiting. Later that evening, I called Sister Beatrice. "We found something," I told her, excitement bubbling beneath my calm demeanor. "It mentions the ring again, but there's more." In the stillness of a morning, I found myself reflecting on an unsettling experience. It was a memory, not of some future event, but rather of a moment that nearly came to pass during the turmoil of 1943. Pius XII had been presumed dead for a fleeting few hours after collapsing, and preparations for a conclave were set in motion. Discussions buzzed, and yet he revived, the conclave never taking place, and the record of it vanished without a trace. There was talk of a ring crafted in that very period, a contingency just in case. I remember pausing to ponder, just in case of what? The image lingered in my mind, the notion of a pope no one had actively voted for, but one everyone expected. I hung up the phone, awash in silence, as the bells of St. Peter's tolled the hour. For the first time in my tenure, I questioned myself. Was I the one thrust into this role without a true election? The next morning greeted me with an unexpected note. It slid quietly under my door, unmarked, with no familiar script. Just 4 enigmatic words. The smoke may stall. I took it to my chapel, setting it beside that peculiar ring, knelt and let out a prayer I hadn't dared utter in weeks. If I am not here to lead, grant me the grace to shield. If I'm not the voice, let me be the silence that holds the next word. If I was chosen through anonymity, may that silence resonate with you. Then it happened. The flame on the altar flickered sharply, and from the ring emanated a single spark. Though not fire, just light. It felt as if the metal itself had awakened, as if it knew precisely what it had been waiting for. It had been exactly 40 days since I first held that second ring. 40 days consumed by questions and hushed warnings. Symbols that had vanished, whispers from unnameable letters, and flames that seemed to sway toward me with no breeze in sight. On the 40th morning, I felt a change, though it didn't strike me right away. I had kept the ring pressed against my heart, much like a monk cherishes a relic. Then, just before dawn, something stirred inside me. A tightness in my hand pulled me from slumber. I looked down and saw it had transformed completely. No scorch marks, no dirt, merely a profound darkening, as if it absorbed every bit of fire it once radiated. When I tried to slip it off, it wouldn't budge. It clung to me with an unexpected intensity. Standing before the mirror, I finally spotted something new. An inscription had materialized around the ring's edge, now visible against the blackened gold. Writing so delicate and precise, it was in English, bearing a single profound sentence. Carved by light itself, the ring was never intended for public view. Its purpose was to be held, not shown. I remember feeling almost like it burned in my hand as I contemplated its significance. I didn't panic or reach out to anyone. Instead, I dressed quietly, prayed alone, and skipped my meal. When the hour approached for the midday Angelus, I walked over to the window with a view of St. Peter's Square. Raising my hand to bless the gathered crowd, I felt the ring sparkle again. Not gold, not black, but a pure white. Once the blessing was done, I stepped back from the window, and Monsignor Bellini was there, looking expectant. "Holiness, the Treasury Archivists," he started, but I held up a hand to pause him. "No more questions," I said. He looked curious, tilting his head to ask about the ring, and I replied quietly, "It's not just a ring, it's the wound I agreed to carry." That evening I decided to hold a private mass. No servers, no witnesses, just a simple crucifix, a candle, and of course, the ring. I placed it at the altar's foot before beginning the rites. As I elevated the host during the consecration, I paused, chalice beneath it, and from the ring's base, a single drop of light fell. There was no sound, just this brilliant white point resting on the altar cloth like morning dew. I completed the Mass in silence, and after the final blessing, the ring had vanished. No guard, no servant had seen it disappear. Nothing in the room had been disturbed. When I returned to my quarters, a simple note awaited me on my desk. It was folded plainly with a message. "When the fire is not needed, the gold will vanish. What remains is you." I looked at my hand. The skin was normal again. No bruise, no warmth, no shine. Just my unremarkable aging hand. Yet it felt heavier, burdened differently now without the ring. In the following months, no one inquired about the absence of the fisherman's ring. I continued to lead masses, conducted meetings, and issued encyclicals, but something had shifted within me. I found myself speaking less and listening more. When I raised my hand for a blessing, some in the crowd claimed they still caught a hint of glint, a flicker or shimmer that vanished almost instantly. On the first anniversary of that remarkable day, I ventured to the papal tombs. Kneeling before every stone, I offered no words. When I reached the grave of St. John Paul II, I set a candle on the floor, and beneath its warm flame, I slipped a note that read, "Thank you for holding it until I could." Standing back up, I turned towards the basilica and whispered to the stillness, "When they ask what I did, tell them I kept the gate."